Hey everybody, I'm Lajara Dane. This is the inaugural episode of the Wheel of Mind podcast where we are going to do character discussions and specifically character point of view specific rereads. I am joined for the first time by my co-host and I'll let you introduce yourself.
My name is Giskel. I am an Illianer who is very interested in studying the Aes Sedai.
So I say Aes Sedai because I think just the audiobook people sound like they say it that way, but I've heard Aes Sedai, I've heard a bunch of other pronunciations. So that'll be our little note of pronunciations we're going to stumble through based on how we've been saying it in our heads, and you'll know who we're talking about. We're going to be spoiling just about anything and everything. What kind of life choices are you making if you're doing a Moiraine specific point of view reread if you haven't even read the regular series in the normal order? So all right, so our readings today were over Moiraine's first point of view chapters. So we're going through Moiraine as a character, deep dive into her POVs. We started with New Spring instead of Eye of the World. There's a lot of other Eye of the World, taking chapter by chapter podcasts out there. And so if you need that, there's plenty of other cool places you can look for that. So we thought we'd do something different. And logically, as a member of the White Ajah, I thought, let's try something where there's a little bit of a gap in the podcast universe here. Giskel, I'm going to turn it over to you to do your summary or synopsis of Chapter 2, A Wish Fulfilled.
Right. Just a very short synopsis of it. The chapter opens with Moiraine and her friend Sioan Sanche standing in the Amyrlin study, along with Gitara Moroso, who's the keeper of the Chronicles. Tamra is the Amyrlin seat. They're waiting there just to be on call for anything the Aes Sedai may need. The Aes Sedai are very distracted, and it's something they don't show very often. And I think they are serenity made flesh, I think is the term that Moiraine used in her thoughts in this chapter. But yes, they begin to notice little details of how the Aes Sedai were nervous or concerned, but not showing it. And then, of course, they hear a change in the battle outside because there's the battle has come up to the slopes of Mount Doom. The town of Tar Valon is not surrounded, but practically so. The war has come up to it. And of course, that is the war with the Aiel. And very interestingly, her thoughts are kind of shaping the story, giving you the beginnings of it. But of course, for any of you who've read the story, New Spring is not really a great place to start. It almost starts with the understanding of what the Aes Sedai are, the Tar Valon, the weaving of the power. So a lot is thrown at you very quickly if you're beginning with that book. But anyway, in chapter 2, they're waiting on the Aes Sedai. They are accepted, which means they've been in the tower for a number of years. Moiraine and Sioan Sanche are best friends and two of the fastest learners in there. In fact, I think it mentioned that they were tied on how short a time they have been, or how long it took them to go from novice to accepted. And they thought they would only be accepted for about 3 years. That tied them with Eleda Orohan, however you pronounce it.
Yeah, I don't know.
In their thoughts, or Moiraine declared she was a very detestable woman. And of course, I'm not going to get into foreshadowing with that yet, but that's, I just thought an interesting touch. But anyway, then, of course, very quickly, the keeper, Gitara, has a foretelling, which is something she has a gift for, cries out that the dragon has been reborn in her foretelling and falls dead immediately. So just a very fast, impactful, fast-paced beginning to this story.
Yeah, it really is. You had a cool chapter to get to start with because it is so short, but it's really to the point once the action happens. There's just the one action that kicks off
Right.
the events of the entire series.
Right. It starts out with some details, like I said, the beginning shaping of the story, what they are, where they are, what they're doing. And that is all told basically in her mind. There's very little dialogue in this chapter
Mhm.
until you get really to the last couple of pages of it. And that dialogue is very meaningful and impactful. But the story is still woven in such a way, even though it's short, you get a lot of information about who they are, what they are. Even if you're beginning with New Spring, you still you start with respect and an admiration for the Aes Sedai and
Mm.
what they're doing, and for the accepted and what they go through to get there. Even though it's just briefly mentioned, I believe he still builds that in.
Mhm. Yeah, you're right. This chapter early on, especially, is a bit of an info dump. Moraine's doing some of the world building for us in her thoughts. And I like that you said at this point in the story, we get this respect for Aes Sedai right away, because that we may not always hold that throughout the series in the same way. And I think our views of them as the reader are kind of, we get to see different sides of them, different things going on in the tower, and get completely different views of them later on.
Right.
But it does set up that this is a really prestigious type of environment. And I don't know that we completely get the idea that it's boarding school just yet, if you don't already know what the tower is like. But we know a lot of the other stuff they mention, like you said, kind of how a little bit about what the tower is, about how Aes Sedai normally act, that they're serenity made flesh, that a little bit about what the one power is and what the channeling is like. And we get even more of that in the next chapter too.
Right.
And we get some about the war going on, but not a lot about who the Aiel are, although that's because, in our point of view reread, we didn't cover this one, but in the previous chapter, we get Lan's perspective fighting in the war, and we get a lot of his thoughts about the Aiel. So here they don't really talk much about who they're fighting, but Moiraine is really anxious, wanting to be able to contribute something to the war, and she also just in passing mentions that her uncle started it. And if you don't know the entire story, that might be a little bit of a shock there, that she just keeps barreling on past with the rest of her thoughts.
Right. It doesn't, she talks about, where she grew up, having servants, and she was never cold at home like she was here, even though she lived in a very cold land during the winter time. But she didn't come right out and say she was royalty until it's just that brief aside thrown out there, and it's right past it.
Yeah, she did. She mentions, growing up in a palace, and we get a sense she's had a privileged upbringing, but she could have been someone at court, not necessarily an immediate member of the royal family, from what we could tell, if we didn't know more about her, or more about Cairhien and her last name and those types of things. But, the most important part of the chapter, as you noted, is the foretelling, and we can immediately tell how serious it is with how the Amyrlin swears these girls to secrecy.
Exactly. Well, just the foretelling itself, the way Vitara cries out, "He's born again. I feel him. The dragon takes his first breath on the slopes of Dragon Mount. He's coming. He's coming. Light help us. Light help the world. He lies in the snow and cries like thunder. He burns like the sun." That's a very powerful foretelling. That's poetic in the way it's given, but it's powerful at the same time. Even if you know nothing about what's to come in the story, this is a momentous point. This is a pivotal point in the history of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge, and it's
in the history of this turning of the wheel.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Because there's neither beginnings nor endings, as we know. So I want to talk a little bit, since this is a character-specific reread, about our impressions of Moiraine in this chapter, maybe compared to how we know her in the rest of the series. So we could get into more spoilery or foreshadowy discussions in this section if you want to go ahead and go there. And because she's so much younger than when we meet her in Eye of the World, there's about a 20-year difference. And under the surface, she seems very different from this composed woman that we meet in the Eye of the World.
Right. I think I like and respect Moiraine more after reading New Spring and getting the point of view of her before she had become Aes Sedai, before she was raised. than I did reading just The Eye of the World when I first began the series over 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
She's more human. And yet, even though she had the privileged upbringing, her best friend is someone who absolutely did not have a privileged upbringing, had the exact opposite family, come from a family, poor fisherman, was basically illiterate when she came to the tower, being sea on. But even when you see her interacting with a novice, Ellen, I believe, or Elin, in the foyer outside the Amerlin study, she has a haughtiness, but she's supposed to have. She's an accepted. The other girl is a novice. Yet at the same time, you still see her, kind of judging in her mind, how do I reprimand this girl for what she's doing wrong, but not be a complete jerk about it? How do I show some compassion? And even acknowledges her own mistake in the way she deals with it as she walks off, yet tries to carry herself as an Aes Sedai, as someone who is not going to be challenged. So you see her, I guess, this kind of balance of knowing she is in a higher station, a higher position, yet at the same time, not lording it over someone just to do it, not being cruel, even though she grew up, someone who was royalty and was very well to do. You still see the humanity in her, the compassion, just the desire to be a good person. And I like that about her. Of course, as we see as the series goes on, her dedication and stubbornness is second to no one, but at the same point, she can still bring herself to be compassionate as much as she can during the situation and not be cruel, yet at the same time still hold a position of authority over other people.
Yeah, she's really flexing that authority and kind of trying it out, it seems like, with Ellen in that scene you were referring to. And I agree that I liked her a lot more after reading New Spring the first time through compared to just the main books in the series, because she's only seeing her from the outside. I mean, we have a tiny brief point of view from her at the end of Eye of the World, but it doesn't really do her a lot of justice. She's eavesdropping with her blue stone. Right. So when we see her from the outside in the Eye of the World, many first-time readers are suspicious of her. We don't know how much to trust her because she doesn't tell you anything. Right. She keeps everything so close to the chest, and I think we see the beginnings of that here, because you see what an important task she and Siwan have, and we understand some of the consequences there might be to them if they let out what their true mission is. But yeah, it seems she could be a little shady if you don't know exactly what she's about and what her motivations are, and New Spring really humanizes her. I particularly like seeing her uncertainty in her thoughts. You see how impatient she is when she's waiting and she's thinking, I want some news about the war. I want to be able to do something to help. And I think knowing something would help, even though that doesn't make sense. She's so impatient compared to the Moiraine we know later in the series. Right. And that really surprised me at first, but it makes sense. She's like, she's like a 20-year-old woman, or 22-ish or something at this point. I don't know, really young, and still an initiate of the Tower. That hasn't even received the rank of Aes Sedai yet when we first meet her. Right. Yeah, I agree. Super humanized in this chapter compared to what we see later. And major spoilers if you're still listening and you haven't gotten this far in the series, all the way to the end of the Fires of Heaven. I actually, the first time that I read the series, read New Spring in between the Fires of Heaven, Book 5, and Lord of Chaos, Book 6, because of Moraine's apparent death scene at the end of Fires of Heaven. New Spring was kind of this retrospective, entirely like in memory of Moiraine book, it seemed like. Yes, and it really gave me this good background that made me appreciate her so much more in ways that I think the Emond's Field characters in her life could never know, because they weren't there for this part of the journey.
Right. They got to see her strength and sometimes her harshness. Mm-hmm. But again, I believe that's only because those things were necessary. Yeah. I do like even the subtlety when she's dealing with Elin. She tries out this subtle not lying thing
Mm-hmm.
that the Aes Sedai does. Even though she doesn't have to, she's not constrained by the oaths yet.
Right.
She could lie if she needed to, yet she doesn't. She tries to find a way to deflect, and it's like she's practicing to be the woman she needs to be. Um, and so, like I said, she has I think, reserves of strength and character that this book brings out more than the others because it can concentrate more from her point of view. And naturally, especially in the eye of the world, it cannot show her point of view as often because there would be fewer mysteries to the story.
Oh
That's part
yeah.
of building a good story is having the mystery that someone knows, but your main characters do not, and they're having to learn it. And so we, as the readers, are discovering what's happening along with the main characters, and that's just well done in her case. But when you go back in New Spring, again, you can find out more about who she is as a person, and I think Robert Jordan did a terrific job of showing who she is. Rather than telling you who she is, he shows
Mm,
you who she is.
yeah. Totally agree. Uh, I like that you brought up the three oaths and saying that, she's trying out that Aes Sedai way of speaking, of kind of
Yes.
not lying but dancing around the whole truth a little bit. And that brings me to one part of just a very specific wording part of this chapter that confuses me a little bit. And I wonder if it was a little bit accidental or how to interpret this. But after Guittara collapses and dies and falls on Moraine, basically, and we know Moraine's
Yeah.
tiny. This woman knocked her to the ground.
Right.
The Amyrlin, takes Guittara and lays her on the carpet, kind of just prepares the body in a little more dignified way.
Right.
Siwan offers to go to grab Ellen to get a serving woman to finish preparing, but Tamara said, "Stay." Tamara barked. The iron-hard gaze studied them both. "You will tell no one about this, not for any reason. If necessary, lie, even to a sister. Guittara died without speaking. Do you understand me?" And that sentence, Guittara died without speaking. I get that she's telling them that they need to say that to people,
Oh, yes.
but how did she say that? Because it's not true.
Right. I didn't catch that the first time, but looking at it, you're right. It's very specific in that it's almost maybe in her mind she was thinking it. You will tell them Guittara died without speaking,
Yeah.
and that would, just those two words would have changed. I guess made it more consistent, and
Hmm.
maybe that's what the author intended. Uh,
Yeah.
of course, there's always the possibility that Tamara was something unknown at this point in the story, Black Aja,
Right.
and that Moraine and Sion just didn't catch that. So we got two possibilities there.
Hmm.
Now, I don't know that she would be, and there's no other evidence I've seen that she might have been, but
Right.
just a possibility to consider.
Yeah, you're right. Those are the two possibilities it really opens up, that maybe somehow the author intended that this is worded in such a way that her oaths still allow her to say this. Maybe, I'm sort of reading it as if she were putting air quotes around it, or mentally doing that, and maybe the oath rod binding oath sort of understands her intention there.
Right.
Um, if you see it as a continuation of the previous sentences instead of just taking it by itself as a sentence out of context, that would make sense to me some. But seeing as how throughout the series we have to very carefully look at literally what they say, that
Right.
raised a flag for me. But I think it could have been, a little bit of something overlooked in a series this long. You could have made a little slip up like that, I'm guessing.
Yes.
uh, RJ and Harriet both could have missed something like that. But there's the Black Aja possibility, like you said. We also don't have any other evidence for that comes up that we know of, but we know that the Black Aja is really active in the tower at this time. That's
Yeah.
a lot of what goes on in this book. And so there is that possibility. When you see a sister lie, that's evidence that she's not bound by the oaths, then that would be a Black Aja thing. But Tamara, I believe, gets murdered by the Black Aja later. So that's the biggest argument against that piece.
Right.
But I do think this passage gives us a little bit of food for thought there.
Definitely.
She seems like a decent, trustworthy person. If we had not read anything besides this about her, I would like her okay after this chapter. I would think that maybe she was a little harsher than she needed to be with Ellen. I know that's sort of how the White Tower operates with the hierarchy, but I wonder if some of the strange practices of the tower that lead to people leaving or not making the cut to Aes Sedai when they're very tough on the novices and accepted. Some of that I feel are practices instituted by the Black Ajah that have made sure that the numbers stay small
Ah,
to keep
never thought of
dwindling their
that, but it
numbers.
makes sense.
So I think it seems like she's really bought into this Aes Sedai culture already, though, in the way that they treat the novices, for better or worse. So you had an interpretation of that was her coming into her own with her power, but I'm already casting a little bit of doubt on the way they treat the novices.
So it's part of the culture there, but perhaps it's a part that should not be that pronounced. Yes.
Yeah, maybe not. But that's one that I think we could reasonably debate because, I mean, it's a boarding school type situation, but it could also be more like almost like a military training scenario where you do have to be tough.
Yes. And then for the same reasons, to build the camaraderie between the people, but to build the strength they need to to face the battles and other things ahead. Yet, that would be much tougher when practically everyone is a drill instructor.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. I think I saw another seed of the Black Ajah's missions in her interaction with Ellen, and I don't know how intentional that is, but I think it's just because in my chapter next, Moiraine thinks a lot about how the tower's numbers are dwindling, and it seems like the Aes Sedai they actively discourage women who can channel from reproducing.
Yes.
And part of Moiraine's little battle she's picking with this girl is that she's got a book about romance.
A romance novel, yes.
Yeah, so Moiraine goes, novices ought to know by now to even get the idea of romantic partners out of their heads because they could live to see their grandchildren grow old and die. Yes. Even. So God forbid a novice get herself with child, because being an Aes Sedai is already very hard, and bringing a child into that would make it beyond hard. So they've drilled in this idea, and I think it's Black Ajah influence to diminish the number of channelers, that Aes Sedai women can't have careers and babies at the same time.
Well, and part of that, and before they're Aes Sedai, they are so focused on their studies that it would be such a distraction. They would pretty much have to quit before becoming Aes Sedai, because of the time-consuming effort of raising a child.
Yeah.
And then afterward, as an Aes Sedai, again, they would have the perspective of, I would definitely outlive my children and grandchildren, and few would want to do that. But so there's a practical side to it, but that still doesn't mean it was not influenced by the Black Ajah.
Yeah, I just think there's so many practices of the White Tower where it seems like there's good practical reasons for it, but at the same time, there might also be some sinister influences that have
definitely led to the weakening of it, whether it's intentional or not. Yes.
Yeah, because I think they talk about at some point in this book, some of the Brown sisters believe that they have been breeding out the ability to channel in humanity over 3,000 years.
Yes.
And the tower's obviously part of that, but there's reasonable, good social reasons for their behavior as well, as you noted. Yeah. So that was all the stuff I could really think of in this chapter. Did you have any other notes or questions or?
No, we've covered everything that I wanted to cover as far as this chapter 2, which again is a short chapter.
It is, yeah. But there was quite a bit of world building and info dump stuff in there, I think. Yes. So without further ado, I'm going to move on to chapter 3, practice. In this one, Moiraine starts obsessing over this numbers thing that I've already alluded to. So Moiraine is wondering at the very opening of the chapter about numbers of Ajah members. So she's like, okay, we see all the colors of the different Ajahs represented equally in common areas of the tower. Why is that? Is it because the Ajahs used to be equal in number? And It starts her on this train of thought that keeps cropping up, but at this point she kind of chalks it up to the fact that she's experienced something pretty traumatic with this woman dying and falling on her and giving this world-breaking type of prophecy, and then being sworn to secrecy about it. So she thinks she's just noticing weird details like you do when you might kind of dissociate during a traumatic event. We also learn a little bit more about her relationship with Siwan during her thoughts too. We find that Siwan is the natural leader of the two, which is interesting and counterintuitive since Moiraine's the royal one and Siwan was born in the fishing village, but that is the dynamic of their relationship. And Moiraine's already predicting that this girl's going to be Amyrlin someday because she is so tough and so powerful and a great leader. Siwan is like, please don't put that evil on me. Don't curse me like that because I want to travel. And that makes Moiraine pretty sad. She's thinking about how, yeah, I mean, if that happens, or if you become Amyrlin, or if we get split up, basically we're not going to see each other more than a couple of times in 10 years, if even that. We get a little more info dump about the world, about what the dragon is and what saidin is after we got saidar, the female half of the powers description in the last chapter. We already find out that as Moiraine was good with trying out the Aes Sedai half-truth thing, Siwan is pretty good at finding loopholes already. She's similarly socialized to the way Aes Sedai behave. Because she's like, well, you know, Tamara didn't, she said we couldn't talk to other people about it, but since we both already know, we can talk to each other about the dragon, so let's keep talking about it. Moiraine is still pretty morose, thinking about the dwindling numbers of Aes Sedai in the tower. We see her describing the living conditions, so we just learn a little bit more about Accepted and what a step up from novices that is. And we learn a little bit more about their channeling ability, rules and chores, basically all the stuff they're having to do. And then they get into the prank wars description, which is fabulous. I wasn't expecting this when I knew them as respectable adult Aes Sedai in the rest of the series, but they do some pretty wild stuff. They're like, oh, we never hurt anybody except for that time that we put itch oak, which I guess would be like poison oak, in Elida's clothes. I mean, that's an exception. Elida just sucks.
But it's one of my favorite parts of this chapter.
Yeah, I know. And then they put the trout in the fountains, and everybody was kind of looking askance at them like, I think these two did it. We know they're big pranksters, but we can't prove anything. So that was just fun, just to see their friendship and the shenanigans they get into together. So, but now they got to get serious. I mean, they have just been given this world-shattering prophecy, and on top of that, they still have to study. All the Aes Sedai are out of the tower. The girls have still got to take their own classes and teach novice classes too. Plus, Miriam Sedai has suggested that Moiraine is ready for her test, and she usually tests you for Aes Sedai within a month of when she says that. So they've really got to practice. Siwan is really good at helping her practice, and they both acknowledge that Moiraine's the one who needs to practice more. She's not as good at controlling these complicated weaves that she needs to do for the test. So Siwan is really good at heckling her and doing just about anything to break her concentration. She's doing that, and they talk some more about the dragon, like, do you think even the Red Ajah would leave him alone? Then Morel bursts in because there's apparently not locks on their doors. They could ward it against people listening, but light forbid they can put a lock on their door. So Morel bursts in, and they're like trying to look like they're not guilty of anything. Morel's like, oh my gosh, the last battle's coming, you guys, because of the Aiel. And they give funny looks to each other, and she's like, y'all have a secret. What's this about? Did Guittara have a foretelling or something? And they're like, Siwan's like, it's not our secret to tell. Moiraine thinks, she's bad at playing the game of houses, bad at the secretive stuff. You shouldn't have said anything, but okay, I guess cat's out of the bag that we do know something. And then they get back to both trying to sort of torment Moiraine while she's trying to channel. Siwan's like, it's not our secret to tell. Let's help Moiraine with the test, and let's get on to annoying the crap out of her while she's trying to channel. And we get just more funny stories about Moiraine squealing like a pig when Morel put ice down her shirt in the summer and stuff like that was just really amusing. And Tarna Fair bursts in. Moiraine's like, oh crap, I gotta go teach class. Lost track of time. Tarna's like, actually, novices aren't having any classes, so they've been released, and we're all summoned immediately to the Oval Lecture Hall, so we gotta run. They're usually keeping their composure. These girls never run, but they like turn tail and completely run as fast as they can. Tarna also told them that Katara had died, but their weird looks again gave it away because they're not really good at this secrecy stuff yet. We see them build that up more as time goes on. She said Katara died. Tarna's all sad about it. For some reason, even though Moiraine said this woman was never kind, like wasn't very fond of her, they run to the lecture hall. They're the last ones to arrive. All the accepted are waiting to hear an announcement from the Amyrlin. And there's a bunch of rumors flying around. Moiraine is still sadly thinking about how the numbers have dwindled, and she's like, don't think about that, don't think about that. Everyone's flying around rumors. She talks to a few different people about what's going on. We meet a sea folk woman, Zamila, and we meet a Tuatha'an or tinker or traveling person woman named Aisling Noon. Everyone's saying Katara had a foretelling, and some people are saying we're all going to be tested for the shawl right now. Just kind of ridiculous stuff. Nobody actually knows what's going on. The Amyrlin, Tamra, announces that they're going to give 100 gold crowns to every new mother who gave birth since the start of the battle to the end, which I think was about 3 days ago. I think they mentioned that it's been 3 days of fighting. So Moraine's like, oh, okay, that's what's going on. We see her bite her lip here, which is funny because she never has a tell like that later in the series. We know that she gets that under control pretty soon.
Yeah, he even says it's just a habit she was trying to break. So
yeah,
she knew she had it.
Right. But she's got that right now. She does it while she's nervous, and she's working on it. The Amyrlin tells them a little more details, like, please listen to the guards I send with you. Some people might think that you're full Aes Sedai, and you don't have to correct them, which I thought was kind of weird. I guess they can sort of use their authority out in the villages like that if it's going to get more people to them and taking records on all the babies that were born. She warns them about white cloaks. She's like, okay, this is not all fun and games. I know you're getting to go on a vacation that you don't normally get to do, but white cloaks can put an arrow through your heart just like they could any other girl who can't channel. So watch your back, and that's why I'm sending the guards, and you better mind them. For some reason, we actually learned the white cloaks are part of the forces defending Tar Valon here, which I thought was interesting. So we know they're out and about and they're close by. But Moiraine and especially Siuan are still just really excited for the adventure because they realize they might get to be the ones who find the Dragon Reborn.
Yeah, I think that is probably a case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. You know, they have no love for Tar Valon, but the Aiel, or they could have taken over the entire world had that be what they wished.
Yeah.
Now, they didn't understand the motivation of the Aiel at this point in the story. Mm-hmm. Most people didn't, but they were invading, so everyone who could fight in some way, I'm sure, took part in trying to repel the invaders. At least that would be their justification for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't think about it that way, but I guess we do see that later in the series with the last battle anyway. A lot of people who have these uneasy alliances against a common enemy. And so here, I guess it makes sense that would happen, because if the Aiel don't stop, that is sort of an end to civilization west of the Dragon Wall.
Right.
They could just completely keep mowing over everything like it seems that they're doing. So let me see if I had some specific things I wanted to point out about this chapter, but is there anything that's jumping out to you about any of the events so far?
Not with much of it's things we've already covered in talking about life in the tower. And again, we compared it earlier in the last chapter to kind of boot camp. But it seems like no matter how much they learn, what they strive to be, there's always someone who's ready to grind them down in an effort to supposedly make them better. What surprised me, it didn't bring it out so much in this chapter, but you start to see it more and more, is even among the Aes Sedai, there are those who try this on other Aes Sedai. Even though they're all equal, they don't all think themselves equal. And they are ready to deal out punishments and other things, again, in order to maintain discipline. But, here we're just seeing it among the accepted and the novices, any of the initiates. But it's almost to the point it would be discouraging to try to do this, much more
Mhm.
so than, as I said, what we have in modern military or in all the struggles people go through to gain any high advanced degree in college. There are a lot of difficult things have to be overcome, but here it seems like there's no encouragement for anyone. Mainly, or at least we're not shown a lot of encouragement. We're shown a lot of discouragement for people,
Mhm.
a lot of discipline and punishments being meted out. And it always made it seem like a dreary place. And if it were not for their pranks they pull on other people, and even in the way when they're trying to help the other one practice to shut out distractions, the tickles and other things like
Yeah.
that. It's like they're doing that to have some joy, some happiness, some relief from just the depressing atmosphere of the White Tower, which again to me should not have that, or should not
Mhm.
have so much of that, because there's so much negative reinforcement, so little positive reinforcement. It's amazing anyone would become Aes Sedai.
It
It would
really
just
is.
I guess their only encouragement is just the joy of embracing Sadar.
Right, which we learn in this chapter, I think, is addictive. That's the first time that
Yes,
comes up, that you don't want to be holding on to it all the time
right.
because you could take more than you can control and burn yourself out.
Right. Yeah, you get both forms of that: the joy, the addiction of it, and also the fear and the danger of destroying your ability to channel. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we just yeah, I really like that whole point you just made about how dismal a place the tower really is. You think it has the potential to be a lot more of a positive force internally and then out in the world, and it's not really accomplishing either of those things. And it does make learning to channel and becoming an Aes Sedai, yeah, it just seems like you would, why would you want to do it other than just to say I did it, like I made it through this
Right.
difficult thing. And
Right.
I don't know. There's a lot of this, I think the Aes Sedai see their methods as a tough love type of approach, but we see training methods elsewhere in other cultures in the series that do that in a better way. And I'm thinking like the Aiel Wise One training that Egwene goes through
Yes.
is, they use a lot of pointless labor and running laps. Here, count this sand, which is, ridiculous, very menial labor that gets the person to think about what they did, but not so much just awful negativity. They will actually praise you. They will, you will build up you'll build up honor with the wise ones.
Right. In fact, did they not have certain tasks that became impossible just to get the person finally to stand up and say enough?
Yeah.
It make them
Yes, they
stand up
want
for
you to
themselves.
buck up to them at some point. Yes.
Right.
And that is something we definitely don't see in the tower.
No, no, that's
Anybody who
not
has those
allowed.
types of inclinations in them, like Nynaeve, they want to try to beat it out of them, or Egwene as well.
Yes, yes, and it's amazing how they resent those that have so much power, the newcomers that we get to find out more of in the rest of the series,
Hmm.
not New Spring, but yeah, their resentment for those. It's almost well, very, I guess, very similar today in what we see in bureaucracies, groups like that, is they slowly transform into something that is only looking out for its own interests and really only concerned with its own power,
Hmm.
not for the original purpose. You see this in government bureaucracies. You see this in many large corporations. You see this in church ministries and different things. Is after a while, it grows to the point that its only goal is to keep the status quo, keep growing
Hmm.
as it was, or to maintain its own power and own control. And that's almost what you see with the White Tower here. In my mind, in the centuries past, and you may have to go back, 2,000 years or more, but at one point in time in their history, it probably was a more positive place,
Hmm.
a place where people were taught what they were doing and how they were to shape history. But you see the Reds become so fanatical in
Mm,
their hunt for men who can channel, that they're willing to sacrifice the Dragon Reborn and basically allow the world to be destroyed rather than allow a man channeler. They've lost sight of their goal.
yeah.
The whites, in their search for logic, kind of insulate themselves away from the world.
Hmm.
The blue, they have all their quests and they have their eyes and ears, yet it becomes about their power against the other Ajas and maintaining their status. And all of them, the Browns are kind of different in the fact they forget the world is there. But
Yeah.
in most of the Ajas, it's like you see them becoming so insular and so grasping for power. I don't believe they're conscious of it, but it's something that's developed over time to the point I believe that contributes to a lot of the negativity in the tower, a lot of the emptiness of the tower. They've again started almost breeding out the ability to channel from the human race. So when the blood of Manetheren, Manetheren,
Hmm.
excuse me, crops up to have such strength in certain individuals, they have nothing but bitterness and resentment for it, because it's someone intruding in their place. It's someone taking power from them, in a
Yeah.
sense, rather than, hey, this is what the world needs at this time. How can we work
Mm.
together? Because they've lost sight of their original goal and intent.
They really have. There's that mission creep from what they originally were there for, and they keep the rules for the sake of the rules and the customs just for the sake of the customs instead of what they're there for. And they resent, in the same way that they resent these powerful new channelers who come in and want to do things in a different way. Like Nynaeve, she has some great points. Like, no, maybe we shouldn't be emotionless robots. I want to stay connected to the people I care about and wanting to save them. When you
Right.
see her go through her Aes Sedai test, no, I'm not going to be calm while I do this stuff. I'm going to protect my people and be the most powerful channeling woman on earth.
Yes.
you know, I'm still going to get both jobs done, and it's possible. And we also see the Aes Sedai's disdain for any other groups of channelers,
Yes.
potentially any other ways of teaching or doing any of the weaves. I mean, you see they even train the girls in this chapter. The girls talk about being trained this, that you have to do the hand motions with it, even though they're not really part of the weave, but you still have to do it. And the Aiel wise ones don't wiggle their hands around when they channel, and I don't think the wind finders among the sea folk do that either. And this also brings me to how dismal, sad a place the tower seems like it will be to live. I especially felt for these girls from different cultures that we met among the accepted in this big
Yeah.
lecture hall, like Zamila from the Sea Folk. Moiraine talks about just how much she keeps to herself, how she has spent years and years and years in the tower, and I think later we learn that this is probably just to keep the fact that there's sea folk channelers, like a lot of them, under wraps. She
Yes.
seems to be a slow learner on purpose so that they don't come looking for more.
Right.
But
She was the sacrificial lamb of her people,
yeah, I mean,
set
think
out
about
there so
how
that I wouldn't go seeking them. Right.
right, how miserable she must be. In addition to the tower just is awful, she's got to live so far from the sea when sea folk try to spend all their time on the water.
Right.
That's got to be tough. And I also thought about the Tinker woman, what that must be like, even though she doesn't seem to be very sad or anything, and she plays a big role later in the series. I just wondered, that must be a huge dramatic change in your life to be nomadic and then to have to stay in this one place for so long. That's
Yes.
not I mean, the Tinkers are singing and dancing all the time and just going where life takes them. And Aisling Noon, she seems okay now, but that must have been a tough adjustment. I can only imagine.
Yeah, that I had not thought of that. That's an amazing point of view, really. Just the contrast between how she was raised, and that would be difficult. Would be a very difficult adjustment to make. Either she truly, truly wanted to be Aes Sedai, or just, like I said, loved channeling so much that she couldn't turn away from it. There was there was some motivation there, because that would have to be more difficult on her than it would be many of the other people. Again, Moiraine is, she comes from a very well-to-do family, a very connected family, yet she's used to the Destimar. She's used to the
Yeah.
game of houses. She's used to having to act one way socially, even if she's around people she doesn't like. She's used to probably having private tutors
Mm.
and things like that, yet being confined to the palace, not having the ability to roam. So it would not be as big an adjustment in one sense, as far as the atmosphere around her, as it would be for someone like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think there are other aspects that Sawan might be well adjusted to, more so, in that she's not used to living in a palace, but she's also used to being very poor. So she's probably like, oh, cool, they feed you all the time.
Yeah,
Like, you don't have to worry where your food comes from. In the same way that some people who come from very difficult conditions actually find some refuge when they start boot camp.
right,
I've
right.
met people who've come from incredibly abusive backgrounds who were like, wow, I had stability and people who seemed to care about me when I went to boot camp. And I
Yes,
think Suwan, I mean, her people just disown you if they learn you can channel and tear. So,
right.
she had a tough background. So I think maybe her adjustment to the tower could have been easier in some ways too than maybe some other folks.
Right. She learned to fight hard for everything she had. So it was,
Hmm.
at least that was a way of life, even though a very different way of life. Just that grit, determination, the having to fight for everything.
Hmm.
That held her in good stead in the tower.
Yeah. I have a few more notes. I took note of the people in both our chapters who show up later in the series, just out of curiosity to see where they end up. Because I can't remember. I mean, there's like 2,400 named characters in this series.
Yeah.
So it's a little tough to say, is this a person who just shows up like in this series, in the White Tower this time and you never see him again? Most of them come up again. So in chapter 2, I mean, they talk about Elida. So they talk about some of the big name people we know we're seeing again, and they talk about how terrible Elida is. We look out for her soon. Ellen Worrell, the novice who's reading the romance novel, is she's been a novice for like ever at this point already. And even in the main series, in the Eye of the World, she's still an accepted by then. So she made it to accepted, but she's a slow learner in the power and probably kind of a weak channeler maybe. So total, I looked her up on the wiki. That's where I found all these people. So uh, read her story on the wiki. Some point during the 14 main books, she is raised and becomes a brown Aja. So she's before that, she was like held the record for the oldest non-Aes Sedai in the tower.
Ah,
And she spent 29 total years as a novice and accepted total, which is, man, that must be tough.
yes.
But she doesn't come up a lot in any other meaningful way. Like when the girls, like Egwene and Nynaeve and Elaine later are trying to figure out where the ageless look comes from before they realize it's the Oath Rod, they're looking at people like Ellen who haven't really shown that look yet, even though they've been channeling for a long time.
Right, right.
So she was part of the puzzle to help them figure it out. But minor character whose name you probably wouldn't remember otherwise. And then Mirian Sedai, the one who tests them, ends up being the big baddie in this book. She's one of the big Black Aja baddies that probably killed some of the Aes Sedai who were searching for the Dragon Reborn. Because by
Yes.
the end of New Spring, Moiraine and Siwan are the only people left who are searching for the dragon. All the other original people who knew what was going on were taken out.
Right. Which makes you wonder how the Black Aja found that out. But
I
I suppose
know.
they tortured or did whatever they had to do when they suspected something and
Yeah.
left them there.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of them here because I read the names that popped up in my chapter, and a lot of them turn out to be Black Aja too. So
Ah,
we've got several who pop up. Well, Varen actually makes her first appearance or mention, but she doesn't quite count, being like a triple agent Snape character as she is.
yeah.
And she's in the White Aja. She's strong in the power, older than Cadsuane, gets murdered by the Black Aja. So if they're not Black Aja on this list, sometimes they're the ones murdered. Lorella Sedai is Grey Aja. She's one of Tamara's searchers that was sent out. I don't think we find out exactly what happens to her. Akarin shows up. She's of the Brown Aja. She becomes one of the folks in the Rebel Tower in Saladar, and she's the one who can detect the residues of Sidene, so she can see where people, like men, have channeled by detecting the aftermath. Morella shows up, who's the one that Moiraine passes Lan's bond to, who then passes it to Nynaeve. So she becomes, that's the same Morell.
Yes, okay.
We get Tarna Fair. Like I said, she's the one who was sad about Guittara dying. She ends up in the Red Aja, but she's one of the few who is attracted to men, from what I can find. She was a wilder, and Galena beat her to get her to overcome her block, and her block was that she could only channel with her eyes closed. Eledrin was in the White Aja. She ended up being one of the rebel sitters in Saladar, so she'll come up much, much later. She voted for war on Elida and alliance with the Black Tower. We got Brendis, the White Aja. She was part of the circle who healed Mat when they actually get him to the tower and heal Dagger Mat.
Yes.
And I think she dies in a battle in Tel'aran'rhiod, the dream world. And then we see Alanna, who in the assembly is like, Maureen's thinking about how flamboyant a person she is. No, she says she's going to be a green and she wants 12 warders. Well, she's the one who forcibly bonds Rand later in the series.
Yes.
So we've already got this foreshadowing of her being a little predatory with the warder bonding. And then one more, we get Tamila. She is a gray Aja, but she's also black Aja, who's part of Liandrin's group. Liandrin, the red sister that we see in the Great Hunt. Tamila is the one who tortured Amathera, who's the Panarch of Terabon. She's the woman who became Juilin Sandar's paramour later in the series, after she was Dako Vale for the Seanchan. And she also tortured Liandrin after Liandrin was shielded by, I believe it was Moghedien or Moghedien, however you'd say that. So we got a lot of key players in way later books who were showing up already, but I think part of this reflects when New Spring was actually written, which was, I think, between books like 10 and 11 or something like that, between some of the much later books when these characters are running around doing a lot of things. But I thought that was interesting. Robert Jordan does this amazing conservation of characters, where a lot of these names are not just going to be pointless throwaway red shirts. They're going to come back.
Right. That is something I had not studied specifically, but in the series this huge, he did a great job of foreshadowing things, foretelling things to come, as you pointed out here with some of the Aes Sedai, and as well kind of recycling and finding a niche for them where they consistently fit that niche, but it wasn't having to bring in 2,000 useless characters that he just threw away, which would be difficult to do in a world building this size.
Yeah, from what I have heard from like the fellow who runs the Dragon Mount forums online, who's been to visit Robert Jordan's property after his passing, got to see a lot of his notes and his sort of writing room and everything. Robert Jordan had just files and files and file folders full of character background information that would never, a lot of it would be stuff that would never actually go into the series, but he would write just pages and pages of a monologue from a character's perspective. And then he would use that to get in their heads and then know who their personality is and what they're going to do in the series. So you would go, and Brandon Sanderson has said this too. You could just go pull out notes and notes and you're like, I've never even heard of this character. And you look them up and they're just somebody who shows up once or twice. But he had a whole backstory for him just in case. And I think that makes a lot more sense when you see how much he reuses characters, because even though he mentioned them once in a way that seems obscure, he already had pages written about them probably.
Really, I mentioned you'd have to to keep it straight. It's difficult reading
Yeah.
through the series to keep some of the characters straight in your head.
Oh my
But
gosh, I know. Especially the Aes Sedai later, like when the tower splits and there's just like a Ciane and a
yeah,
Saren and all these similar names.
yes, a lot of names are thrown at you. So,
I think that was about it in terms of the notes I had for this chapter. Do you have anything else?
no, just thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a character name. Yeah, I've been trying to decide whether to be like a warder
Mm,
or what, and I don't
yeah.
know what would fit a southern accent that I'll try to hide a little, but
No, you don't have to do that. That'd be cool. We could just say you're from Ilion, where it's muggy and it's the South.
yeah.
Like that's where we're from. We're
Okay.
Ilioners. And my
All right.
accent just faded a little bit from a long time in the tower. um, I just had a cool exchange with the General Matrim Cawthon himself. Just recently had some exchange with him where, do you remember the Forsaken Bilal who shows up in like book 3? He was bragging and saying he's immune to balefire, and I was like, oh, are you immune to balefire because it's also not aware of your existence? Your thread in the pattern, maybe it's too small to see. And Matrim Cawthon was like already sort of promoting me like, hey, if you want a nice jab, check out Lajara Sadice. And then it was a nice little place to start promoting the podcast. So we've already got our first fan who's never listened to any of our episodes yet. Maybe his Taviran luck will help us out.